community emergency response teams are very helpful at any time, but we have found our partners in New Braunfels, Texas, are making the best of what they have during the pandemic. During COVID-19, the very valuable New Braunfels Cert team has been brought in to serve in planning and other roles for the Emergency Operations Center. Today we're going to talk to Lisa Rubey, who runs the New Braunfels Cert team, about the service of that team. Today I'd like to welcome you to the #R6 Prepares podcast. We serve Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Texas, 68 tribes therein. This is Bill Bischoff. Welcome to the #R6 Prepares podcast. We hope you enjoy the show. Lisa Rubey, thank you for joining us today. You have been at New Braunfels Cert in various capacities for several years, and we've had you on the Region 6 Community Preparedness Working Group, and I've gotten to know you and your work there and the work of your team. Welcome to the #R6 Prepares podcast.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Well, and I know that you are extremely busy right now. If you will, you're one of the teams that went straight in when the rest of us kind of slowed down to try to figure out what was going on when COVID-19 hit. Your team was put to work. So if you don't mind, tell us what you normally do, what your team normally does, and then tell us how you operate during COVID-19. Which, by the way, for those listening, maybe at a later date, we're talking on September 22nd, and right in the midst of the first day of fall and in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. So, if you will, share with us what you can, Lisa.
Oh, sure, I'd love to. So, New Braunfels Cert is sponsored by the City of New Braunfels Office of Emergency Management and under the Fire Department. And so in a normal operation time, we do a lot of training, of course, monthly training. And we do a lot of work with city events. So we do a lot of first aid work during our festivals for the city, Wine and Sanger Fest, for example. And so this year, we didn't get to do a lot of first aid work since a lot of things were being canceled. We also work very closely in the planning section with our emergency management coordinator. So normally during non-COVID times, we would have been writing incident action plans for those city festivals, working with the fire and police departments and the Office of Emergency Management to pull all that together. We also have a... Go ahead.
A question. You said at the beginning, you said you do a lot of training. Yeah, you're training for what? What sort of training do you do?
So we have monthly meetings, and we train a lot on first aid medical because we do a lot of first aid events. We do a lot of incident command training because we also do run the planning section for the City of New Braunfels Emergency Operating Center. And we also do training for our incident management team for our Watchtower program that we use. And in that case, we're the weather watchers. We are involved in watching social media during weather events, and we stay up all night long so that the city managers and everybody else can sleep, and we keep a good eye out in case New Braunfels is prone to flash flooding mainly. So
right.
We pay attention to that kind of stuff. So we train on how to do Watchtower and the procedures, work on WebEOC and NWS chat features that we have available to us. So that's a lot of what we do in our training. And then we do a lot of outlying things just for our search and rescue team, also trains monthly. We have a National Association of Search and Rescue certified team and instructors, and so we do a lot of our own in-house instructing for search and rescue, along with CPR first aid, wilderness first aid. So we keep quite busy on a regular basis. We do around 6,000 to 8,000 hours of volunteer time a year with our team. So it's we like to stay active, I should say.
No kidding. How large is your team?
So Currently, we have just over 100 members on our rolls, but like most programs, we probably have about 40 to 50 who are more active than the other members. We do have some people who don't want to train as much, but when we need them to help come set up a shelter because we're sheltering for either point-to-point shelter or sheltering for our own people during a flash flood, they will come and help us and do the muscle work that we need done to get those things set up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very good. All right. And now during COVID, tell me where you're serving now.
Well, interestingly enough, our very first call for COVID came on March 13th when President Trump issued the proclamation for the emergency for the national COVID. Our emergency manager for Comal County, Jeff Kelly, contacted our emergency manager for New Braunfels and said we're going to open an EOC response for COVID, and he needed some members to run the planning section for the county. And so we got 4 of us together and responded to the Comal County Emergency Operating Center and started to run their planning section. So we had a planning section chief, a situation unit leader, and 2 watchtower people who were working there doing social media, watching for news releases and things like that would help. So we were creating an action plan. And then on Monday, March 16th, the city of New Braunfels also stood up their emergency operating center, and we were asked to do the same thing and be in the planning section for the city. So we would have 3 to 5 to 7 members also respond to the city emergency operating center. So we did that from March 13th, and oh my goodness, we ended sometime in May. We ended Comal County in May 7th, and we ended at the city of New Braunfels on May 29th. So that was our initial response, and we had about 23 members respond at various times, and we ended up for the county doing 866 hours of volunteer time, and for the city, we ended up with 1,689 hours of volunteer time staffing the operating center, so for a grand total of 2,556 hours by 24 members. And you know how important that is for matching funds for disasters. So calculating with a rate for volunteer time for Texas, that's a little over $64,000 worth of time.
Oh my goodness! Oh man, I'm hard earned and well served. So thank you very much. Did anybody during that time become sick with COVID? I mean, what procedures were taken to keep from being a number yourselves?
We had very strict procedures in place. In the county EOC, we also had public health, and so they made the initial precautions that everybody followed, and that was taking temperature twice a day. This was pre-mask time, so we hadn't even started with masks yet, but we had taken our temperature. We had strict procedures on closing down your station for the day and wiping it clean. You had to obviously self-report if you had any COVID symptoms and not show up. We didn't have anybody in our team get COVID from working in any of the operations. And then once the governor started with the social distancing and we had to kind of switch up, Comal County took a lot of the people out of the operating center because we had about 20 people in there, and we moved some people into different offices and spaced us better so that we could adhere to that no more than 10 people in a room. And the city did the exact same thing, same procedures of taking a temperature, cleaning your stations, and then, of course, socially distancing. And with the mask rules, now we follow the rule of if you are closer than 6 feet with anybody, because we are back in the operating center, then you have to wear your mask, or if we're sitting at our stations and we're socially distanced apart, we're pretty okay. So it's been a different experience because, as I said, we're back in the EOC. So on July 9th, we got recalled back to the planning section. The county and the city decided to combine an emergency operating center in support of our nursing homes and distributing PPE as we started to have a COVID outbreak in our nursing homes. And so we called it the Unified Resources Center. And so we have been working since July 9th. We're on day 52 in there, distributing personal protection equipment and tracking the equipment coming in, tracking the requests, and tracking the equipment going out to our local nursing homes.
So as you're doing that, let's just, again, remember, this is all volunteer. Who would be doing it if you weren't? Would anybody be doing it if you weren't? But and I say that because I believe New Braunfels is not to date myself back to the Donnie and Bree show, but a little bit country and a little bit rock and roll. Meaning you've got you're very near urban areas, but you're also, as you mentioned earlier, your wilderness is right around you as well. So if you don't mind, say where you are in the state and kind of describe yourself geographically, and then just kind of give me the rest of the idea on it.
So New Braunfels is in Comal County on the I-35 corridor between Austin and San Antonio, kind of nestled really nicely right in between both of them. So for fun and entertainment, if you want to go to Austin, you can. If you want to go to San Antonio, you can. The urban sprawl is definitely coming towards New Braunfels. When I moved here 10 years ago, it was a sleepy little community, and now we're looking at, hope in this census, we might reach close to 100,000 people. Fast-growing community, right with hill country. We have two rivers, the Guadalupe and the Comal River, which is why we tend to flash flood at times, but great for recreation, except this year is an exception to the rule, but it's an exception to every rule. So it's a wonderful place to live and grow up. We've been pretty blessed here in New Braunfels that the community is very supportive and has really worked hard to manage to take care of our community, and we have a lot of great volunteers, which our program is so blessed with so many wonderful volunteers. As you said, who would be doing this if it weren't for us? Mm-hmm. We'd have to pull, and the city and county would have to pull some employees from doing their daily job, which is difficult in a smaller community. And so that would be how it would work. And for us, we have been blessed also with the fact that the second go-around, some of our employees are actually back to work. In the first round, we had a lot of people who weren't working because of the closings for COVID, so we had people who could respond that normally wouldn't be able to respond. And because of the nature of the planning section, we're also able to do remote work. So our person who's writing the IAPs, Jerry Burgess, has been doing a great job every day doing a daily IAP and sending out a 209 report for us, and she's actually doing that and working from her normal job. Once you have that IAP kind of written, it hasn't changed much.
And
so
you're saying IAP, for those that don't know, instant action plans. And what do those instant action plans typically have in them?
So basically it talks about we're tracking what our goals and objectives are, which this time around is to distribute the personal protection equipment to the nursing homes. There is some drive-through testing that's still going on within the community that's also mentioned in there. So we're capturing that type of information of what our response is, what our daily numbers are coming out, going in, and working with the public information and the public health to track numbers for COVID.
Okay. All right. And you said this is the second time around. Tell me, on the front end, what were the nuts and bolts of the planning committee on the front end when you were first deployed in?
The front end, again, a lot of it was, again, writing the incident action plan, which on the front end really was coordinating some basic outcomes of setting up drive-through testing, coordinating what public health was doing with the county and the city, and also a lot of Watchtower, which was our daily team of scanning news articles, watching the CDC, looking for guidelines, following the governor's guidelines, looking for different cities, how they were managing their COVID response and what their closings were looking like. And so it was a lot of what I call intel gathering.
Right. Seeking and making sure you have awareness and that everybody is able to share in that awareness and make the decisions that can help all. Yeah.
Yes. So it's a lot of paperwork went into it, a lot of documentation.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing that somebody's got to do, and the fact that you're able to step up and do it, I would imagine that your community, from time to time in the world of CERT, you do hear of folks that have teams that maybe are trained but don't work too closely with their first responder or city manager contacts, and there's kind of a lost value there. In this case, it sounds like the opposite. It sounds like you're not only asked to be there; if you're not there, it's really not going to go nearly as well.
And that's really a great compliment to the amount of time and effort that our team puts in training and working with our city and our county. We are very blessed that they're very supportive of us, which is great. They've allowed us to step into the role for the planning section and helped us get the training so that we have the proper training to do those, and have been really supportive in that area. And it works very nicely for us because volunteers in CERT, if you only wait for disasters, you might wait for a long, long time to be able to respond. But this helps keep us active and up to date on information. It helps get us out in the community also with our response by them allowing us to do the medical and the first aid events and working with them that way. With Worst Fest on a normal basis, we would be working with Worst Fest and writing the incident action plans for the police, sheriff, and fire response to our Worst Fest. But again, with COVID, we're not doing that, but we're doing it for COVID.
Right. Well, and I came to know you over the years because of the training and New Braunfels CERT's willingness to share their best practices and lessons learned. So if you don't mind, share with me where you are now. I was so pleased to find that the National CERT Association had realized the potential that comes from New Braunfels and comes from you, and had put you to work. Can you tell me what committee you're leading and what you're doing with it?
So I was asked, and I'm very excited to be the chair for the National CERT Association Training Committee. We are just, as you know, the National CERT Association is a newer entity, and we're just really starting to get rolling and rolling out a lot of great things for CERT programs to be able to find resources and best practices. And so the training committee is going to be working on doing some new training videos that we can put out there that your programs will be able to just download and use in your training or in your 317 basic CERT class. So we're very excited to start those kind of processes and working with the National CERT Association for in their conference setup. I know that we are looking at Missouri is all set for 2021. Unfortunately, they had to cancel 2020, and so we're looking at possibly being here in Texas for 2022, so we'll be supporting that effort of getting conferences set up. Conferences are a great place for CERT members to come together to do training, to share ideas, to learn from each other. One of my things in the traveling around the country for being a speaker, I spoke at the 2018 conference in Florida, is finding out how diverse CERT programs are and how they're utilized so differently in different communities. But from every one of those programs, you can learn something about a best practice or about a new way of doing things, and bringing together teams to come together is really exciting to do that.
Absolutely. It's always thrilling, both at the National CERT Association and the National CERT Conference. And then, of course, I've gotten to know you over the years through the Region 6 Community Preparedness Working Group meetings. And it's always fascinating to hear everyone kind of watch them throw their cards in on CERT and see how they handle it in the different states. And one year, I remember just being thrilled by watching Arkansas and New Mexico, who tend to rely on CERT to teach individual preparedness and not as much for teams. Get in a vigorous discussion with you and your colleague John Herman from Galveston County about the value that your CERT teams bring to the community and how you're actually relied upon during times of disaster and blue sky days. And so just having that at the national level, I think is a wonderful thing, because it shares that value and shares the best practices and lessons learned on a larger scale. So.
And, when we first met, the New Braunfels CERT team was supporting the Texas Youth Preparedness Camp, which was a Region 6 Youth Preparedness Camp, and doing moulage and providing role players for the teen CERTs for their final activation. And then we kind of grew into there and expanded our involvement into that program, and that's a wonderful program for outreach to youth. I was one of the lead instructors in, not this year, but the last year camp. And, I went out and spoke to other schools in San Antonio talking about the youth and their importance in preparedness. And that's another great thing that we can have as a national conversation and training, is making sure that we're bringing that youth programs up and running also. So those are some things we're excited to get going.
Absolutely. I've been very, very proud of the work that's been done in Texas through the Texas Youth Preparedness Camp and your involvement in that with the moulage every year. That there's by the end of the camp, you see these kids that start, high school age kids who start as these very nervous folks who are trying to figure out who they're meeting, and they're kind of shy, and they're hanging onto the walls as best they can, and then they get all this disaster training and first aid and instant command and search and rescue and all this, and you see them grow during the week, and then when you do your part at the end, it makes it that much more realistic. That applying moulage and the drill, the big final exercise that they have. I will tell you, I have been unnerved because I'm always given a front row seat in the buildings where the disaster, the faux disaster is unfolding, and I'm amazed how, as everyone's screaming and making it as realistic as possible, how I want to hold my ears and dive into a closet while these young people with green hats and determined looks on their faces are running right towards whatever they need to take care of, and able to keep their wits about them and go through the instant command procedures. And for you to be a part of that and for me to get to watch it over the years, it's just that you're doing some good work when you see these young people leave that camp. They're going back to do good things in their community. So that's been one of the thrilling parts for me as well. So.
Yes, we really enjoy that type. And I've actually had students contact me later and say they actually used the fire extinguisher for a small fire because they learned how to do it in camp, and they just happened. One person was driving past a park, and this garbage can was on fire, and there happened to be a fire extinguisher there, and that youth went out and put that fire out because they had learned that skill in camp. And that's the type of skills that we want all of our communities to learn.
You're absolutely right. We see it every year, and we see that these they just come out as seeds, and they're planted in their communities, and they grow, and they do wonderful things. Speaking of, you've got a seed yourself. Your daughter, I remember talking to you a while back, and you said that she had been a big part of, shelter operations, and that kind of shaped her future.
It did shape her future. We were working with Comal County for point-to-point shelters during Hurricane Harvey. And my youngest daughter, Haley, was still at home at the time, and she was active in CERT instructor. And her working in that setting of the point-to-point shelter really affected how she viewed things. And she really ended up saying, you know what, I want to be a helper and a first responder. And so she just graduated from EMT school and is currently waiting for her state certification to start applying for jobs. So it's amazing. It's amazing how disaster response can shape, what you want to do.
Oh yeah, and there's all kinds of ways to serve, and you found a way. She's finding a way that, but it's all about the service. So thank you very much. If you will, let's go back to that National Cert Association for a minute and the training. I've had a couple of calls as of late, maybe the last year or 2 years. The University of Utah and the state of Utah has really put a lot of emphasis on a hybrid cert training. And it's been regarded mostly favorably by Region 6 partners. I've had Arkansas and New Mexico have really embraced it because of what I mentioned earlier, that they're primarily rural states with not a lot of cert instructors. So, if you can get your training virtually and then not maybe, but there's a part where you are going to be tested in person for the skills that you've learned, that seems to work well for them. I've had other folks, though, who have had thriving cert programs and that are team-based say, man, I don't know that I want any part of that. What is your feeling, and how do you regard the hybrid training?
So I've been in a couple of the webinars explaining the hybrid training, and I actually asked one of our incident management team branch directors to take the class without him knowing much about it, just to see what his thought was. And so he went out and took the class and it had a very favorable view of the course and itself and how it worked to explain some great basic cert concepts. Again, we're trying to figure out in this time of COVID, we have people who are still interested in joining our team, but it's hard to have a basic class in person when you have so much hands-on experience that happens in a CERT program, because that's the best part of the training is you literally get to do the splinting and the bandaging and, the putting out of the fires. And so it's been difficult. So we are trying to decide if we're going to do this and offer that hybrid training and then have people come in on a more one-on-one and do some skill sets. Again, having a big disaster drill is a little difficult to do in this time, but we might eventually get there again where we can say, okay, the whole CERT team's going to have a big disaster drill, and so for those of you who have done the hybrid training, here's your time. When we get there after maybe a vaccine or however we're going to figure that out as a world, that we're going to get to be able to be together again. So we're really looking at trying to utilize that. We've also been utilizing some Zoom training. That's how we've been doing it, and we're doing a national search and rescue course, SARTEC 2 course for our teammates as kind of a test to see how well hands-on training can be incorporated with a Zoom lesson. It's a little bit more difficult, and we will have some skills that we have to be outside and go do because this is a SARTEC 2 certification. But to kind of figure out that balance, this hybrid training, it seems like it's going to be a really great option. The thing I miss on it is, of course, I like to teach and instruct, and I like to see people's faces and have their questions being answered, and it's harder for us to explain because every CERT team is a little different, a little bit about how we're different in our training and why it's important to join our team and not just take the training and leave. So there's good and take, and good and bad and good and take on it, and I think, but it's a very timely training that's happening, and I can definitely see, especially in the rural areas where you don't have an instructor cadre that's able to work, that this is really going to be a benefit to the nation.
I think you're right. Training-wise, I think you've already gotten into it, but just in case, for the National Cert Association, what's your immediate path training-wise? So
for our training for the National Cert Association, our immediate goal was, after our first meeting, is we'd like to take 10 CERT skills, and make new training videos. We're gathering information to see what 10 videos the states would like to see. We're talking to some state coordinators. I just talked to our state coordinator in Texas and tasked him with sending me a few ideas of what he'd like to see. We're talking about putting out a national training survey, and then we're going to make and find those skills. We don't have to redevelop them. A lot of programs across the United States might have great videos that we can incorporate and vet and look at, and then put them out there and say, hey, this is a good training video. Let's use, you can use this. You can download this. So that's our first project that we're taking on, and that's a pretty big project to start. So that's where the training committee is moving forward, or decided to move forward during our first meeting.
Right. I would also, as Lisa said earlier, National Cert Association is fairly new, so I would recommend anybody listening to this podcast just Google National Cert Association, and you'll see what comes up. And I've noticed, we have our hashtag R6Prepares Twitter account and our hashtag R6Prepares YouTube channel. On the Twitter account, you'll be able to find we follow and have retweeted recently the National Cert Association's Twitter handle. So anybody wanting more information on that, you can find it those two ways. And beyond that, I've just got to say, Lisa, we stay impressed at FEMA Region 6 and our Community Preparedness Working Group with the great work New Braunfels, Cert, and you do. And we're just thrilled that not only have you been sharing it with us over the years, with your partners in the other states and the tribes, but now we're thrilled that you're taking care of it at at the helm of training at the national level with the National Cert Association. And I love the way you work. You're very collaborative. You're cooperative, and I know that people love to work with you because you're going to get things done. I would just like to say from the bottom of my heart in Region 6, thank you. And I'm certain that you'll be hearing more of that in the future on the national level. And that is everything y'all done has just been magic, and I know it's a lot of hard work that goes into it, so thank you.
Well, I'm just really fortunate that I have the best group of volunteers and the best group of volunteer leadership. They drive us to do better. They drive us to improve on a regular basis. They're very willing to come together, to work together, to make the community a better place, to spread the community preparedness message. And I just can't thank the volunteers of NB-CERT enough for the hard work that they put in to just bring the program forward. And we wouldn't be where we are without all those people who help this community and respond when called. So CERT is a great program nationally. If you're listening, get involved in your CERT programs, build a CERT program. It's a wonderful way. We call it a CERT family for a reason. And so I just want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to share our story.
Certainly. Keep on doing what you're doing. We'll keep on doing what we're doing. Thank you much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the hashtag R6Prepares podcast. If you'd like to subscribe, please click subscribe and leave a comment. And we'd also like to thank our leadership at Region 6, Tony Robinson, Randy Michelle, Lisa Hammond, Shirley Fox, and, of course, our producer, Lee Baker. Thank you for listening. We'll talk to you next time.